Okay, in this short little mini lesson, I'm going to explain some of the basics you'll need to know and understand about the British colonies. You've previously read a little bit about the other colonies, the Dutch, the Spanish, the French, other people that come to the American continent in hopes of riches, religious freedom, and other aspects. But we're going to be focusing on the British colonies and why they came and what their... The first thing you'll need to understand is what is a colony. When we're going to be talking about the 13 colonies, you need to understand the basic definition of what is a colony. And this is a group of immigrants or their descendants who settle in a distant territory, but usually remain subject or closely tied to their mother country, in this case, England. So as England sends over ships, they're going to set up little cities that will then become kind of territories and colonies. Everything that goes on in this colony benefits the mother colony, or country, sorry. Now, John Smith is going to offer his service as a colonist in the Virginia Company when they come over as a sponsored voyage from King James of England. They're going to arrive in about 1607. It takes about 4 months of traveling for them to come, and they're going to sail up a river into the Chesapeake Bay, landing in what is now known as Jamestown, which is our first colony, named after King James. Now, this is not an easy beginning. It's actually quite a disastrous start for Jamestown. This joint stock company really wants to turn a profit quick and to make a lot of money. A lot of the colonists that arrive will go quickly to find riches and gold that they have heard of from other explorers and conquistadors and things of that nature. But because they're only looking for gold, they do not farm. And because of that, they are near starvation most of the time. There are many records of the people saying, "Thus we lived in the space of 5 months in this miserable distress, our men night and day groaning in every corner of the fort, most pitiful to hear." And it's lucky that they even came back with colonists, and they're saved. Even though John Smith goes home after being sick, he will come back with more colonists and will eventually be able to save them. Now, one of the most profitable crops in the New World was tobacco, and with tobacco comes a large need for more laborers, and that is where we'll see the introduction of indentured servants. We will see many come over for a contracted period of time. That's what that word indentured means, for temporary amounts, usually 7 to 9 years. They would pay their voyage over. Their contract would be including their voyage and their time, and then once they've paid off all that, they can have their freedom in hopes of some land in return. We do see our first African slaves arriving too in 1619, but most of them were given freedom and land afterwards. Slavery, as we will see later in the colonies, does not exist at this point. Needless to say, there's going to be a lot of clash with the natives as more and more colonists demanded more and more land and pushed west for more room for crops and for search of gold and other land. A lot of natives will continue to push west. Yes, we do have examples of the natives and the British colonists getting along, but we also have very extreme examples, like we'll see in the next slide, of Bacon's Rebellion, where they did not get along so well. But unlike the Spanish, who mixed and intermingled and sometimes even intermarried with the natives, we do not see that with the English. One of the biggest differences we see is the difference between the constantly fighting natives and even those pushing west. Now, 1/3 of these white men that have arrived are not only colonists, but they're indentured servants, and they lived on the western frontier constantly fighting with the natives. One of the most extreme examples we have of the indentured servants kind of going after their own freedoms is with Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon being an indentured servant who fights against the colonial leaders for representation. Ironically enough, this will be the same issue that comes up later on with the colonial leaders and their mother country. Now, with Jamestown, we see an example of coming for riches and resources. Now we see another R pop up, which is religion. Many people are going to break off from the Church of England as well as the Roman Catholic Church and want to purify themselves or separate themselves from the churches. We see that first example of separatists being the Pilgrims, who want to establish another colony in North America known as the Plymouth Colony. Many want to purify themselves from the Roman Catholic Church, hence your Puritans, or to separate yourselves from the Church of England. They see some impurities in those churches, and they want to separate themselves, have a new land to worship as they will. Now, an example of a moral society was the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They believed in setting a moral and ethical example to the rest of the world. John Winthrop, who is pictured here, being one of their leaders, wanted to set the Massachusetts Bay Colony as a city upon a hill. The people would look to this colony as an example of religious freedom as well as democracy. We see our first attempts at a full democracy here, as well as allowing all males to vote. Now, this is not uncommon at the time for women or for African slaves at the time not to vote in the world. So that wasn't seen as such a drastic change, but the fact that they wanted to set themselves up as a beacon to the world, a religious beacon and a moral beacon, was highly observed. Now, two other founders of the colonies that we'll learn about are Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson. Now, Roger Williams felt that the colonists needed to buy their land from the natives, that everyone should be free to worship according to their own conscience. We'll see those kind of Declaration of Independence beliefs come back later. He'll set up a colony called Providence that will later be called Rhode Island. Anne Hutchinson believed in a self-interpretation of the Bible, that you could think of it and interpret it for yourself, that you didn't need priests to do that for you. Because of her I know it kind of cut out there, right there. I just wanted to kind of emphasize, if we go back real quick, that Anne Hutchinson was kind of seen as a radical believer. And because of that, she felt the need to kind of impose these beliefs on others. She was banished from her colony, and she will settle in what is New York. A lot of her famous descendants and notable descendants come from her, including presidents, actors and actresses, and even some of our most famous religious leaders. Our next colony that we will look at is Pennsylvania, which was settled by William Penn. Now, he settled this land because it was actually given to him, the land was, because of a debt owed to his family. Here, Penn will establish a society of Quakers, which is a Protestant, or people that are protesting against the church, and a break-off group. In the next slide, you'll look at some of the examples of beliefs they had. Here you see some of the beliefs of the Quakers. For example, the reason they get the name the Quakers is because of that second point right there, that they were allowed to speak freely, that if the Spirit quaked them or moved them to speak, they were expected to. They didn't have any formal ministers. Anyone at any point could get up and talk and express the spirit that they felt. They dressed very plainly and opposed to serve in the military. Now, as you look more at the Quaker beliefs, make sure you notice some of the uniqueness between them, the Puritans, and the Pilgrims. Now, although a mini colony started for riches or religion, most of them realized they needed to make money one way or another, and mercantilism was the way they did that. Now, I hope you see the word in there, merchant. It's an economic system that's based to increase your nation's wealth. You buy more, you make more. And that is kind of the policy of the colonies. And you'll see that in the next slide, that many of the British realized that the colonies had a lot of wealth under their hands, and that they wanted to take a piece of that. Now, as you look at the next slide, I want you to look at some of the words that might stand out, some commonalities you might see. For example, look for the common country you see in these navigation acts. Now, these were acts imposed on the colonists during that time, the British. You see, no country could trade with the colonies unless operated by, only two, first had to pass through. You see that England is setting itself up to be the major benefactor of the colonies. Many merchants at this time of the colonies will find this wrong. They will think that they should get more of the money, and in reality, they probably should. But the English are able to hold them down. This will be one of the acts that will anger the Americans going into the American Revolution. One of the last things I wanted to do was to show you kind of the differences between the New England, Middle, and the Southern colonies. Now, I've included some of the textbook pages here, and I hope that you'll dive in and to see some of the similarities, some of the differences between the two. Eventually, they'll all unite for a common purpose of Revolution and independence, but they will separate again. So I want you to look at what made each colony kind of unique and different depending on their region.